David Foster Wallace understood what it would take to create a literary renaissance, and today we are going to hear Wallace's opinion on one of the most hotly contested debates in the writing community. And no, it's not the left versus the right in terms of politics. It's not minimalism versus maximalism. And depending on which side you fall on in regards to this debate will tell me if you are actually a soul jaw for the cause of bringing books back into modern consciousness. And speaking of that struggle, on this channel, I talk about the greatest authors and the greatest books of all time and release daily videos. So if you are interested in that type of thing, please subscribe and let us now hear from Wallace. I was thinking about this because we had some kind of public argument about this in San Francisco. I was in grad school studying writing in the mid-'80s, and there were some of us who used popped elements in some of our stories, brand names, celebrities. And our professors who were, 20 to 30 years older than us strongly opposed this. Their belief was that literary fiction, like most serious art, was supposed to be timeless, and pop elements were vapid and trivial. Literary short stories were supposed to be part of high culture, which was really kind of the antidote for low culture. We had a very interesting intergenerational argument about this at school because the kids my age, I was in my early 20s at the time, we just didn't get it. Media and marketing and corporate and celebrity stuff were part of our reality every bit as much as cars and highways and skies were part of our professor's reality. But as I've grown older, I've realized, I think, that there is a big difference. The romantics, skies and babbling brooks and nature and all that stuff, those aren't human products. Much of the media world that I and we live in is a human product, made by human beings with agendas and fears and desires, and that there's an odd resistance to thinking in any but the most reductive. These are evil people trying to manipulate us. In terms of what the human reality of making all this stuff is like, I don't know if any of that makes sense. And for anyone who's ever been in a workshop before, you guys know that this is one of the most axiomatic philosophies of how they are run. When I got out of high school, I went to a four-year university and was so interested in reading and Taoism and skiing and chasing women and all these other things that I just totally failed out of school. I also had concussions. And so after that, I went on a multi-year journey of being a ski instructor and doing a bunch of other crazy stuff I can't talk about here, at least until I can go full time. And eventually I returned to Las Vegas, where I was born and raised, and had to go back to community college. I had to do it. I had to go back to junior college as like a 22-year-old. And during that entire time off, I was reading and writing and like really into, self-growth and education. So I'm back in these like 101 classes, and I was getting a creative writing degree. And this is Las Vegas, everyone. This campus is pretty close to the Strip, and all the creative writing classes would take place at night from 6 to 9 p.m. And so you'd get a lot of people who were like working jobs and these type of people. So it was very common to have like strippers, people working in casinos, homeless people just trying to use the facility. Like there was a whole cast of characters in these creative writing classes. And everyone thought they were going to write the next great book on Vegas or the next great story. And I had this professor, his name was Lee Barnes, and he was a Vietnam veteran. This is him over here on the left with the bazooka or whatever the hell that is. And he saw combat, wrote a memoir on it. And so during the same semester, I took 2 fiction writing workshops, one on Tuesday night and one on Wednesday night. So on Tuesday night, I would go to Lee Barnes' class, and you were not allowed to speak, and you were not allowed. He would literally not workshop your stuff if there were any elements of modern society in there. If I was mentioning like Ice Spice didn't exist back then, or Lady Gaga, he would just automatically reject it because you had to send it out to them and you had to fix it. You had to not include those elements. And that was the thing that he was most strict about. And he got his graduate degrees like late 70s, early 80s when David Foster Wallace is talking about this. But then on Wednesday nights, I had another professor named Erica Lazaire, and she was more, as you guys kind of see, she's a little more woo, a little bit more hippie, very kind. And you could talk during the class. You could include, you were encouraged to include modern elements. So we had these 2 different polarities. And in terms of how you were supposed to respond to the other students, there were 2 different polarities. Lee Barnes, it was like a baptism. I ended up taking multiple workshops with him, but there were all these people who thought they were hot shit, including myself, or people who would come in with these stories about Vegas or that were just crappy writers, and he would not be nice about it. He would just totally down them, be like, this sucks. He would say that. He would say that there's nothing you can do to make this good. You could have the best editor in the world, and this still wouldn't be good. And he also gave a lot of great corrections. You could tell that he read the stuff very deeply. He cared, like you could go talk to him. He offered a lot of mentorship and kindness outside the classroom. But in my other professor's class, you had to say something nice to every single student. If I remember this girl turned in something like a fifth grader would write from a dog's perspective, and the dog would go woof and then walk and take a piss and then go bark, bark. And it got to be my turn in the circle that I was supposed to say something about it. And I just remember saying, I'm not saying anything about this. That's what I said. I have nothing to say. So looking back, when I was in those classes, I would see Lee Barnes and be like, his philosophy is outdated. These ideas, these principles, we need to move into modernism. We need to move. There's been people like David Foster Wallace and all these other authors. And there's so much to talk about now. There's so much to commentate on. These are kind of these old world ideas that necessarily don't work, because what is this idea of legacy anyway? When you look at writers who like, I don't want to include any of these elements because it's going to tarnish my legacy. You're very self-absorbed. No one's going to read most likely any of our work 100 years from now. A select few from history get read, and with declining reading rates and with artificial intelligence, which will be able to create literature and art and all these other things, a lot of our work will probably be overlooked. We're not even as good as our predecessors. We haven't put the time in because of technology and because our dopamine's all screwed up to be able to beat all the people before us. So the only thing we really have on our side right now is recency bias, because if you publish something new, people are going to like a little bit more because it feels more modern. But when you're looking at building a resume, so a lot of writers go the traditional route. A lot of you guys out there, this is what you're thinking right now. I already know. Okay, I'm getting my MFA. I'm going to build up my resume. I'm going to publish in some short story publications, get some journals published or some poems published, get that kind of moving. Then that will help me get the attention of an agent. Then I'm going to get a novel published, all while working on my MFA or eventually a PhD. I'll maybe post on Instagram, kind of get this audience going. Then eventually I'm going to kind of slip into this career. And maybe I'll be working another job, but I'm going to make it with this method. And this has been the method that we've been told for decades, and it's absolute bullcrap. But the way that you succeed with this method, the highest degree of succeeding, is if you're doing, in today's age, things that are very connected to modern times. If you look at a lot of the stuff that's getting published by all the major journals, not all of them, not all the time, but they are very connected to modernity, to a lot of the things that are going on, to social justice issues. And so there's this false illusion. And once again, there is this lie that there's more going on than ever. There's YouTube, and there's weird people like furries, and there's weird stuff happening on TikTok. And you can talk about all these different people and go crazy. And so there's more information to critique and to remix than ever, and you'll get rewarded for it. But what that also means is that there's a wider degree of experience that people don't understand. If I read a story about a furry, I may be interested, but I don't really care about that. If it's really well written, I'll get into it because damn, that's crazy. And that's what being a good reader is about. But most people aren't us. Most people just don't read to read. Most people don't pick up a literary journal and read it from cover to cover just to see what's going on in modern literature. And so when we look at the heart of what becoming a true writer in 2024 is about, we're returning to the old ways where you need to develop an actual true connection with your audience. You have to be genuine. I come on here sometimes and I say crazy things. I make videos that piss people off or say things that would be career killers to someone who's in the mainstream book publishing world. Look at all the flack that J.K. Rowling gets. J.K. Rowling is a feminist, even though she's a TERF. By all available means, she's, on the left side of the aisle and agrees with most of the things kind of happening in that realm of politics. But just because she disagrees with one element of the left's agenda, she is just the number one villain in the writing world. There's a reason that most writers stay exclusive or they toe their party line. It's because with a couple statements, you could kill most of your audience. For instance, if Cormac McCarthy, who was a reclusive author, came out and he was like, you know what? I support trans people. I hate conservatives. Donald Trump's the worst thing that has ever happened in the world. He'd lose a massive part of his audience. Or if he came out and he said that, leftists are ruining the world, even though he actually did kind of say that in his 2005 Vanity Fair article, but if he said that very upfront and in a published statement and it was direct and explicated on it, he would lose forever this massive chunk of his audience. And so if you take that traditional publishing route, if you're working with the journals, if you're working with the agent, if you're trying to go and be a professor, especially in 2024, a lot of professors who already have tenure, are already in positions, they're pretty safe. But if you're trying to go on that trajectory now and you're actually going to be authentic, and if you read a lot of books, if you feel into yourself and live an experienced life, you're going to have extreme opinions that piss people off. They're going to be all over the place. When someone has opinions that just match one philosophy, I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? And so this is kind of the introduction to this concept of what Wallace is talking about here and kind of bringing it into modern context and talking about this divide, because you may be like, wait, what? Because if you want to write timeless pieces of work that are high art, that are high culture, you're going to have to transcend the agendas, the fears, the desires, a lot of these base consciousness elements that are not just a part of our modern reality, but are being thrusted upon us at these insane rates. Because if you play into these ideas, so right now, because of social media and corporations and these huge power grabs that are going on, and they've been going on forever, but they've been a lot further away from us. Now with the control system and global surveillance systems and technology and all these other and the price is increasing and getting harder to live, we are much more constrained in terms of how we can kind of escape these ideals. I wish every single one of you guys out there, I'm sure all of you guys want this. Most of you guys want your 40 acres in a nice valley with some mountains around, or near a beach, or a house near the beach that's nice and doesn't have bums running around. That would be great, right? But to get there, you would have to participate most certainly in a lot of these mechanisms of control. And even if you got there, you'd still be inundated in a lot of them. You can't join any group. Everyone's so polarized, and things have kind of reached this level where we can't escape it unless we really, really try to and make it kind of a central focus of our lives. And it is consensual reality. And consensual reality right now is very unhealthy. People are getting less happy, less intelligent, and less healthy every single year. And that shows no signs of improving. And so this is the media world that we are living in. It is all fake. It's all being manipulated. It's all to serve some big purpose, because big AI data and statistics and neuroscience and control groups have been, tested and used ad infinitum, and they know how we're going to react and how we can be manipulated. And so bringing that into your literature is not a good idea. Even critiquing it, you're putting the virus into your literature and you're treading on weird water, when instead you could return to the base elements, to the things that have worked and will continue to work in art in time forever, and aren't as dependent on the ever-shifting moods. If you look at how, like, for instance, in American politics, the left and the right look at war policy, they flip every once in a while. Nothing really is consistent in terms of policy, and everything's always changing. And there is a hierarchy in terms of what good art is. It's very hard to say, and people, it's subjective. It's not necessarily subjective. The closer we get to nature, the closer we get away, the further away we get from artifice, the better the literature is going to be. And you can write about artifice, you can write about those things, but you have to be doing it very authentically. Once again, as I said, not get lost in it. And so that becomes very difficult. And there's a kind of high risk, high reward payoff when you do that. But for most of us, especially at the start of our journey, we should be like what Wallace said, the romantics, skies and the babbling brooks and nature and all that stuff. Those aren't human products. There's still, every single day, not a lot of human products in our reality. If you do the right things, if you go and watch sunsets, if you take walks, if you systematically remove yourself from nature and from these kind of dopamine raising apps and realities and the EDM music and all this stuff, if you remove yourself from that, we're still very close to the 1800s, to the Wild West. We can still tap into a lot of those feelings, a lot of those ideas. And we can write like David Foster Wallace at his best when he was writing about authentic characters and even about nature. We can write like Cormac McCarthy. And what that's going to do, and this ties back to what I was saying earlier about making genuine connections, that's going to make your audience feel very close to you, because you're not hiding behind this manipulated veil. You're talking about real things and showing that you understand what it feels like to connect to them. Because the guy that goes on the most popular hike in whatever city you're at, and he goes with his friends and he's talking loud and he's playing EDM music, or like they're being weird, and he goes like once a month, or he takes, anytime he's with a girl or something, he takes someone out there. He doesn't understand nature. I'm sorry to say it. The trail runner doesn't understand nature, but the person who goes out there and contemplates contemplates it and spends time out there. Or even just with family, the man, the workaholic who seems to have the happy family from the outside, doesn't understand it as much as the, maybe guy who doesn't make any money, but who really spends every moment of his time after work making genuine connections with his family. He understands the concept of family, the things that matter in life, the things that are free. That's what we care about as a reader. Those are the real things. And as writers, we can connect with all those for free, but it's hard and it takes a long time, and most likely will take years, if not decades, to attain mastery over that and be able to compete with these guys because it took them decades to learn that knowledge. If you didn't grow up like Cormac McCarthy did, running around in nature, not having any technology, then you're way far behind. Most of the greatest authors of all time grew up in that reality. They grew up in a world without technology, without phones, where you could go out and spend hours out in nature, having a good time, playing with your friends, connecting with a wife, or women, without porn, without all these types of deceptive media and red pill and black pill and blue pill and all these other pills. They're being shoved down our throat at an exceedingly high rate. Our parents, if you're young, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, they got to experience that reality. And so in terms of what is real in life, they're ahead, and that's what they were trying to tell us. That's what Lee Barnes, that's what David Foster Wallace's professors were trying to tell him. David Foster Wallace became an addict, became a television addict, was a dopamine fiend, couldn't focus, couldn't get his shit together, eventually whacked himself out so bad that he died because he got off of these drugs. But if he was living authentically and living good, he probably a couple decades before could have gone off of those way earlier and wouldn't have had to face the consequences of being on an SSRI that was really bad for you for 3 or 4 decades. And so these are the long-term sacrifices. This is short-term is invest in this. Take the typical route. Polarize onto one side and gain an audience that way, and you'll be really popular in the writing world. But in the long run, you'll never achieve success in kind of that timeless sense, even just for your generation. And you'll never actually make a real connection with your audience because everything will always be changing. People are going to look back and be like, yeah, that was really cool. That guy's mind-blowing, but can he do it now? Because when things are changing, so let's say like Wallace, David Foster Wallace pulled a lot of stuff because he was writing this in his 20s and 30s. A Girl with the Curious Hair was written when he was 22, 23, 24. Broom with the System when he was 21, Infinite Jest in his late 20s, early 30s. So he was connected to the culture. And so he could commentate on it. I can commentate on it. I spend 8 hours a day with a bunch of 14 and 15-year-olds and hear all their slang and their language. And I've kind of been very connected to that since I was in school. And the chain has been unbroken. I've spent a lot of years out in nature, but I can kind of tap into that culture if I needed to. But eventually, I'm not going to work there anymore. Eventually, this channel is going to be able to fuel me being an independent writer and content creator. And I'm going to be very detached from that. And so if that's all I have, and that's what happens. So David Foster Wallace is writing about this stuff, and what happens to him? Well, eventually he gets a wife and a kid, and he slows things down, and he doesn't watch television anymore. So he doesn't understand about modern culture. So what does he do? He writes about the IRS. That's all he has to write about, which is cool. That was kind of his attempt to kind of pivot away, which was, I think, a very smart move and kind of combines both styles very well. But why not just focus on the meat and potatoes now and not have to pivot later? You understand it, but that just means that if you spend time on it, okay. So as I was saying earlier, you have 2 options. You can be someone who stays connected to all this bullshit. You can stay connected to the politics, to the media, to all the going-ons, and write about that 20 years from now. Imagine, does anyone out here want to still be on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or engaging in mindless debates about politics or like whatever the hell you do in terms of modern media 20 years from now? Do you still want to be worrying about Taylor Swift or watching the Super Bowl 20 years from now? Does that sound fun to you? Is that your ideal lifestyle? If everything went great and you had all the money, all the riches, all the success, the relationship you wanted, would you need to watch the Super Bowl anymore? Would you need to be engaging and paying attention to any of these things? And nobody wants to do that. No, we're only doing that now because we are traumatized, because we don't have what we want, and these dopamine hits are just like really good for us in terms of what we think we need in the short term. And so in your lifestyle today, you can make a decision, and it's actually going to help you, because if you get off all that crap, if you turn off all the negative media and the negative people out there, and you focus on yourself, on your connection, on positive positive educational content, then you're situating yourself to be a monster 20 years from now. And then when it's time, and then when you build up that audience, because that's all that you're doing, willpower, And motivation, have a connection to dopamine and doing hard things and staying calm and not, being involved in the fluctuations of life and like the excitement and the depression. Oh my God, Joe Biden won. That makes me really happy or really sad. And this is what he's doing now. If you remove yourself from all that, eventually, when you have the skills, when you have the audience, you're going to have the power, the motivation, and the skills to be able to write a great magnum opus. And that should be the goal of our life. McCarthy got there, Cormac and even David with Infinite Jest and Blood Meridian and Suttree. And they got there in their 40s after kind of decades of grinding. David Foster Wallace had been writing, thinking about language since he was young. You really peak. You peak after a couple decades of this. And so once again, this is why it's so highly contested. This is why it's such a big debate, because kind of the postmodernist elements of the writing world wants you to connect to something that involves politics, that involves the betterment of the world right now and making a commentary on that. That's kind of been the thing, making it ironic. And then kind of the old world writers, kind of the conservative writers, they want you to look back into the past and view this idealized romantic reality that never really existed back then. When we're told to look at the past, it was never good. When we're to talk about the golden era with the greasers, how many women were getting beaten and the women were just taking Valium? It was a bunch of bullshit. And so the great writers focus on the present, focus on real human emotions and the journeys and experiences of these kind of base things. And then it doesn't matter when your story is taking place or what the hell is going on with it, because people are going to be interested. And so let me know your guys' thoughts on this. And thank you for supporting real literature. Thank you for still listening, still buying books, still holding on to that glimmer of hope that we can do a turnaround, because I know that reading and having a growth-oriented mindset gives more dopamine, gives you more pleasure, is a much more fun reality than being ignorant and unconscious. And to move from ignorance, to consciousness is a hard journey, but once you're there, it's much more fun than that previous reality. And so I love you guys. We'll probably talk about this again one day in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next video.